January 1942. The first light of dawn spills over a Pacific airfield, painting the corrugated metal hangars in muted gold. The salty breeze carries the tang of aviation fuel and the distant roar of engines warming. Young American ensigns shuffle across the tarmac, their flight jackets stiff with cold, hands gripping the throttle controls like lifelines. They glance skyward, where the horizon seems to promise both freedom and death. Across the water, the Japanese Zero awaits in pilots' imaginations, a perfect predator of the skies. Sleek, fast, and unnervingly agile, it has already shredded Allied formations, turning air superiority into a fragile hope. In the briefing tent, mechanics and engineers pace nervously, their charts and sketches detailing experimental aircraft designs meant to counter the Zero's deadly grace. Here, on this remote strip of coral and steel, innovation and desperation collide. The solution is not in courage alone, but in invention. A new fighter, small, precise, and lethal, is being readied, dubbed, in hushed tones, the Ensign Eliminator. Its promise is audacious, to outmaneuver the best the Japanese can throw at it. The stage is set. The skies will decide. The winter of 1941 had left the United States Navy reeling. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, was not merely an attack. It was a blow that shattered complacency and exposed the fragility of America's Pacific defenses. Battleships lay crippled in dry docks, and aircraft carriers, though spared, were thrust into the center of a war for which the Navy had been only partially prepared. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces moved with startling speed. Wake Island fell within days. The Philippines, despite desperate resistance, succumbed to the advancing Imperial Japanese Army. It was in this climate of urgency that the American fighter pilot first encountered the Japanese Zero. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was not simply another enemy aircraft. It was a revelation. Pilots who had flown the F-4F Wildcat, sturdy and reliable but heavy, found themselves outclassed in nearly every maneuver. The Zero could climb faster, turn tighter, and accelerate with an almost unnatural smoothness. Dogfights that might have been even contests against older Japanese planes became near-impossible tests of survival. Accounts from early encounters described the Zero as ghost-like, appearing and disappearing with terrifying agility, often leaving American formations scattered and struggling to regroup. The psychological weight on American pilots was immense. Newly commissioned ensigns, some barely out of flight school, were suddenly thrust into combat against an enemy that seemed invincible. Reports from the field spoke of fear, awe, and frustration. Experienced flyers recognized the danger. The Zero's light frame and long range meant it could engage, disengage, and strike where the U.S. Navy least expected. Every sortie became a study in humility and improvisation. Naval intelligence scrambled to provide actionable insights. Reconnaissance flights, captured documents, and the testimony of downed Japanese pilots painted a picture of an aircraft designed for dogfighting dominance, not simply for striking power. The Zero sacrificed armor for maneuverability, placing a premium on speed and agility. American engineers, meanwhile, began evaluating the Wildcats' limitations in stark terms. The F-4F, with its rugged construction and heavier armament, could absorb more damage, but its turning radius and climb rate were liabilities against the Zero in the hands of a skilled opponent. Amid these constraints, American commanders explored every avenue to regain parity. Tactical theorists emphasized energy fighting techniques, using altitude and dive speed to offset the Zero's turning advantage. Pilots practiced simulated dogfights over training fields, weaving through makeshift obstacles to replicate the unpredictable movements of the enemy. Even so, results were mixed. Early engagements in the Coral Sea and over the Philippines revealed the stark reality. Without adaptation, the Zero would dominate the Pacific skies. The need for innovation was undeniable. Traditional approaches, more training, more sorties, were insufficient against an opponent whose design and doctrine granted near-total mastery of aerial combat. Engineers and flight officers debated potential solutions: lighter airframes, more powerful engines, and modifications to armament. Every idea was measured against a single standard. Could it allow a U.S. pilot, often a green ensign, to survive a face-to-face encounter with a Zero? In the midst of these calculations, rumors circulated about a radical concept: a small, highly maneuverable fighter built to exploit the weaknesses of the Zero. The name, whispered among pilots and engineers alike, was the Ensign Eliminator. Its promise was audacious: a machine that would not simply compete but outmaneuver and neutralize Japan's premier fighter. Though still a prototype, it represented the intersection of desperation and ingenuity, a response born from necessity rather than pride. The Pacific theater was vast, and every encounter mattered. From coral atolls to the open ocean, air power determined the fate of fleets and islands alike. In these early months of 1942, the struggle to control the skies was not only a battle of planes but a battle of ideas. Strategy, technology, and human courage all converged on a singular goal: overcoming the Zero before it could claim more lives, more ships, and more territory. And so, as American pilots adjusted to this new reality, a plan began to form: a blueprint for survival, and eventually, for dominance. The lessons of early engagements, the painstaking study of enemy capabilities, and the relentless pursuit of innovation would lay the groundwork for the Ensign Eliminator. The war in the skies had begun, and the fight for supremacy demanded both brains and bravery. By early 1942, the urgency to counter the Zero had transformed from theoretical planning into a full-scale technological and tactical race. The U.S. Navy, having absorbed the shock of Pearl Harbor, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding both confidence and capability. Every lost pilot, every downed Wildcat, underscored a singular truth: the Zero's dominance was not just in its performance, but in the skill of the men who flew it. Understanding the aircraft required understanding the pilot. Intelligence reports detailed the Japanese emphasis on discipline, formation cohesion, and aggressive maneuvering, techniques that American rookies struggled to match. In response, the Navy accelerated experiments in fighter tactics. Training squadrons were reorganized, and veteran instructors emphasized energy management over traditional tone-and-burn dogfighting. Pilots were taught to avoid prolonged toning battles with Zeros, instead exploiting dive speed and altitude advantage. These were incremental improvements, and yet they offered the first glimmers of hope. Small groups of Wildcats, when flown with disciplined energy tactics, began to survive longer, sometimes even scoring kills. But the margin was narrow. Every engagement carried a razor-thin line between survival and catastrophe. Meanwhile, Engineers and designers turned to the drawing boards. The question was simple: how could an American fighter match, or exceed, the Zero's agility without sacrificing durability? Weight reduction became a priority. Armament layouts were reconsidered, balancing firepower against maneuverability. Prototypes were sketched, incorporating ideas that seemed radical even to seasoned designers. The goal was a plane light enough to outturn the Zero, fast enough to escape its firing arcs, and robust enough to protect its pilot. Testing became relentless. Wildcats were flown in simulated combat against older aircraft modified to mimic Zero behavior. Engineers measured climb rates, turn radii, and dive speeds down to fractions of a second. Pilots provided immediate feedback, often blunt and unsparing. Too sluggish, one ensign noted after a trial, and it's just another target. Another veteran added, "Speed alone won't save you. You need control, precision, and trust in the machine." These assessments guided iterative improvements, blending human experience with mechanical innovation. The concept of the Ensign Eliminator began to crystallize in this environment of necessity. It was envisioned as a small, nimble fighter, optimized for dogfighting survival. Its design emphasized a high thrust-to-weight ratio, minimal drag, and precise control surfaces. Armament was concentrated yet effective. Enough firepower to bring down a Zero in a few well-aimed bursts, but not so heavy as to hinder maneuverability. Engineers considered every detail, from canopy placement to landing gear weight distribution, ensuring that the plane would respond predictably in high-stress aerial maneuvers. Simultaneously, American intelligence worked to understand the Zero from an operational perspective. Reconnaissance pilots provided maps of Japanese patrol patterns. Captured manuals and interrogations of downed pilots revealed fuel limitations, structural vulnerabilities, and patterns in engagement tactics. Every scrap of information fed into the prototype design, ensuring that the Ensign Eliminator was not merely an experimental plane, but a machine informed by data, tested against the known strengths and weaknesses of its opponent. Yet innovation was only half the battle. Pilots would have to adapt their instincts. The Ensign Eliminator demanded precision, discipline, and a willingness to embrace tactics that ran counter to what many had learned in training. Dogfighting became a science as much as an art. Pilots practiced hit-and-run attacks, altitude management, and coordinated group maneuvers. Even minor errors, a shallow dive, a delayed roll, could prove fatal against the Zero. The combination of human skill and technological innovation would be decisive. By mid-1942, the first prototypes were complete, and a small cadre of test pilots took to the skies. Early flights were cautious. Maneuvering tests revealed both promise and danger. The plane could outturn many mock targets, accelerate sharply, and climb efficiently, but it was unforgiving to hesitation. Each trial refined tactics, adjusted control surfaces, and confirmed that the Navy's gamble might succeed. What began as desperation had evolved into disciplined experimentation. The Ensign Eliminator, still unproven in actual combat, represented the culmination of months of ingenuity, adaptation, and learning. The Pacific skies were unforgiving, and every pilot understood that theoretical superiority meant nothing without execution. Soon, these aircraft would leave the airfields of Hawaii and the South Pacific, confronting the Zeros that had so long dominated the horizon. The stage was now set for America to test its innovation, not in controlled trials, but in the harsh, chaotic reality of battle. From these preparations would emerge new angles: human courage, technological ingenuity, tactical experimentation, and leadership decisions that would determine whether the Ensign Eliminator could fulfill its audacious promise. For the young ensigns taking the cockpit of a Wildcat, every sortie against the Zero was a baptism by fire. Many were barely 20, their training rushed by wartime necessity, their nerves stretched thin by the roar of engines and the thin line between life and death. Letters home reveal a mix of awe and fear. Men who had once flown in mock dogfights now confronted an enemy that seemed almost supernatural. Survival required more than courage. It demanded acute observation, split-second decision-making, and relentless discipline. Pilots quickly learned that instinct alone was dangerous. Energy conservation became a mantra. Dives and climbs, throttle management, and precise coordination with wingmen dictated life or death. Mistimed maneuvers could leave a plane exposed to the Zero's superior turning radius, turning a confident sortie into a fatal spiral. Despite the fear, the human spirit persevered. Veterans mentored the rookies, transmitting hard-earned tactics while acknowledging the sheer luck sometimes needed to survive. Each encounter, each narrow escape, hardened pilots' resolve. The human element, courage, improvisation, and trust in comrades, was as vital as any mechanical advantage. The Ensign Eliminator was born from a single, urgent principle: outmaneuver the Zero. Traditional aircraft modifications were insufficient. Engineers focused on reducing weight, increasing engine responsiveness, and optimizing aerodynamics. Every gram mattered. Control surfaces were refined for maximum responsiveness, and the fuselage was shaped to minimize drag. Even the placement of fuel tanks and landing gear became a question of tactical advantage, designed to enhance performance under combat stress. Armament posed a critical challenge. A fighter could survive by evasion, but it needed firepower sufficient to down a Zero quickly. Too light, and the enemy would escape. Too heavy, and the plane would lose its defining agility. The Ensign Eliminator balanced this precariously, carrying concentrated firepower and relying on precision rather than volume. Technological innovation extended beyond the aircraft itself. Mechanics and engineers developed new methods for rapid repair and maintenance, understanding that the harsh Pacific environment could ground planes as quickly as enemy fire. Every flight, every adjustment, represented a fusion of human skill and engineering acumen, a delicate dance between man and machine. American pilots had to rethink everything they had learned. The Zero punished mistakes in traditional dogfighting. Long-turning battles were suicide. Instead, pilots adopted energy tactics, exploiting dives to gain speed and climbs to regain altitude advantage. Attack patterns emphasized surprise, positioning, and controlled aggression. Pilots learned to strike in coordinated groups, using mutual support to offset the Zero's individual superiority. The Ensign Eliminator introduced additional tactical possibilities. Its tighter turn radius and accelerated climb allowed pilots to engage Zeros on more equal terms, challenging the Japanese dominance in the skies. Exercises tested how small formations could bait Zeros into predictable paths, then exploit the Eliminator's strengths to counterattack. Training scenarios mimicked real engagements, accounting for wind, sun position, and pilot fatigue. Commanders emphasized adaptability. The Pacific theater was unpredictable. Weather, logistics, and enemy movement required split-second tactical choices. Pilots were trained to combine instinct with analysis, to read enemy behavior, and to adjust flight patterns dynamically. Success depended on blending human judgment with technological advantage, a synthesis that could only be mastered through relentless practice and hard experience. In the early months of 1942, naval leadership faced impossible decisions. The U.S. Navy had suffered devastating losses, and every pilot, plane, and mission carried immense weight. Admirals and squadron commanders were forced to balance risk against necessity, knowing that every failed engagement could alter the course of the Pacific War. Orders were precise yet flexible, encouraging initiative while demanding discipline. Leaders recognized the limits of technology and training. They understood that raw numbers, more planes, more sorties, were insufficient against an opponent that excelled in skill and maneuverability. Decisions now involved integrating innovation, intelligence, and human capability. The creation and deployment of the Ensign Eliminator were themselves a product of strategic foresight. Leadership sanctioned experimental tactics, authorized rapid prototyping, and allowed unconventional approaches, all under the watchful eye of a Navy desperate for solutions. Commanders also grappled with morale. Pilots returning from encounters with Zeros carried tales of both fear and triumph. Leadership had to nurture confidence without fostering recklessness. It was a delicate balance. Too rigid, and innovation would stall. Too permissive, and losses would mount. The Navy's emerging doctrine reflected this tension, blending calculated risk with tactical ingenuity. Understanding the enemy was central to countering the Zero. Japanese pilots were trained for precision, cohesion, and aggressive engagement. They exploited the Zero's maneuverability, often initiating encounters from advantageous positions and disengaging when necessary. Reports from early battles revealed a consistent pattern. Zeros attacked in pairs or small formations, using vertical maneuvers to dictate engagement terms. American pilots quickly realized that fighting the Zero on its terms was futile. Intelligence briefings emphasized studying Japanese tactics, predictable dive-and-climb sequences, specific approach angles, and favored attack formations. By analyzing these behaviors, U.S. pilots could anticipate enemy moves, creating windows of opportunity for counterattacks. The Ensign Eliminator was designed with these insights in mind. Its agility allowed pilots to react to and exploit the Japanese patterns, turning the enemy's strengths into potential vulnerabilities. The enemy's operational mindset also influenced morale. Japanese pilots believed in aggressive offense, rarely yielding to fear. Their confidence, though formidable, created moments of predictability. American leaders and engineers sought to capitalize on this, designing both tactics and aircraft that could exploit overextension, mistakes, or environmental factors like sun glare and cloud cover. Combat against the Zero was not only a physical challenge but a mental one. Pilots faced the constant awareness that the enemy was often superior in maneuverability, experienced, and fearless. Fear, though natural, became both a liability and a tool. Training sought to convert terror into disciplined action. Pilots were taught to focus on altitude, positioning, and timing rather than the intimidating presence of the enemy. The psychological impact extended to the Ensign Eliminator itself. Pilots trusted the plane to enhance survival, but it demanded respect. Any hesitation or error could negate its advantages. This tension created a heightened awareness, sharpening reflexes and situational judgment. Veterans noted that flying the Eliminator required both technical mastery and mental resilience. Morale was also shaped by success and failure in equal measure. Every successful engagement with a zero bolstered confidence, proving that training and innovation could overcome the odds. Conversely, every loss reinforced the stakes, underscoring the razor-thin margin between life and death. Pilots became hyper-aware of both personal performance and the broader implications for their squadron and the Pacific theater. By mid-1942, the first Ensign Eliminator prototypes had rolled off the assembly lines, their polished fuselages gleaming under the tropical sun of a Pacific testing base. The airfield buzzed with cautious optimism. Pilots approached the small, nimble aircraft with a mixture of awe and anxiety. This was no standard fighter. It was an experiment in survival, a tangible answer to the question that haunted every American pilot. How could one outfly a zero? Test flights began in the early hours, when the heat of the day had yet to distort the air. Pilots climbed into the cockpit, fingers brushing the instruments that had been redesigned for precision and speed. Mechanics signaled readiness, and the roar of the engine filled the morning, vibrating through metal and muscle alike. The Ensign Eliminator responded instantly, lighter than the Wildcats, sharper in the roll, and unusually forgiving in tight turns. For the first time, pilots felt the possibility of matching the zero in agility. Simulated dogfights became the proving ground. Engineers and senior aviators arranged exercises that mimicked Japanese engagement patterns. "You'll have to anticipate every move," a flight instructor warned. "The zero doesn't fight like anything you've trained against, but the Eliminator can give you the edge if you respect it." Pilots maneuvered in steep climbs, diving in controlled bursts, banking sharply to evade unseen threats. Every successful pass increased confidence, but every near-miss reminded them of the stakes. Early encounters revealed both promise and limitations. The Eliminator could outturn older aircraft used as zero stand-ins and maintain energy in maneuvers that would exhaust a Wildcat. Yet the plane demanded precision. Hesitation, sloppy inputs, or misjudged altitude could negate the advantages of design. Engineers meticulously recorded every flight, adjusting control surfaces and calibrating the throttle response. The learning curve was steep, but progress was undeniable. Beyond the mechanics, a psychological transformation occurred. Pilots who had once regarded the zero with near-mythical fear now approached it with cautious confidence. The Ensign Eliminator did not make them invincible, but it leveled the playing field. Veterans noted subtle changes in attitude. Eyes were sharper, reflexes faster, and decisions more deliberate. The aircraft became an extension of strategy, translating theory into survival. Tests escalated from controlled exercises to mock combat with multiple aircraft. Small formations flew against coordinated squadrons acting as zeros, simulating the unpredictable conditions of Pacific dogfights. The Eliminator's speed and maneuverability allowed pilots to execute hit-and-run tactics, exploiting enemy patterns and maintaining altitude advantage. Every sortie became a real-time study in energy management, positioning, and teamwork. At the same time, engineers documented every stress point. Structural limits were pushed to extremes. Steep dives, rapid rolls, and sustained high-G turns revealed weaknesses in fuselage integrity and control responsiveness. Adjustments were immediate. Fuel lines were reinforced, canopy mechanisms refined, and armament calibration fine-tuned. Each improvement was guided by the dual lens of data and lived experience. What the plane could endure versus what the pilot could execute under pressure. By late summer 1942, the Ensign Eliminator was ready for limited operational deployment. Intelligence officers selected target zones where zero patrols were frequent, but where engagement could be carefully controlled. These early missions were deliberate and cautious, designed to test the plane and tactics without unnecessary risk. Pilots carried maps, charts, and contingency plans, aware that the Pacific skies could shift in an instant from calm to lethal. The first encounters with actual zeros were tense. From above, American pilots spotted the familiar silhouette, sleek wings, long nose, and graceful curves that belied deadly capability. Initial passes were a dance of positioning: dive, climb, tain, evade. The Eliminator performed as promised, matching the Zero's turns, exploiting altitude, and delivering precise bursts of fire. Several Japanese aircraft were forced into defensive retreats, an unprecedented outcome in early 1942. The data was unequivocal. The combination of advanced tactics, pilot skill, and innovative aircraft had created the first tool capable of neutralizing the Zero's dominance. But it was not perfection. Each engagement carried risk. The Zeros remained formidable, and any error could be fatal. The climax was not a single moment, but an accumulation of repeated trials, each testing the limits of man and machine. The stage was now set for the next phase, real combat, where stakes would be measured not in controlled exercises, but in the chaos of actual battles over the Pacific. The lessons of testing, the early successes, and a refinement of strategy and technology would soon be put to the ultimate test. By late 1942, the Ensign Eliminator had moved from prototype to operational deployment. Squadrons based on carriers in the South Pacific began integrating the new fighter into patrol rotations. The stakes could not have been higher. Japanese Zeros continued to dominate the skies, striking Allied positions with speed and precision. Every sortie presented the possibility of success or total disaster. The first true combat tests were methodical yet tense. Pilots flew over small Japanese-held islands, scanning for enemy aircraft while maintaining altitude advantage and formation integrity. When the silhouette of a Zero appeared, the encounter shifted from reconnaissance to full engagement. The initial seconds were critical. Positioning, throttle control, and split-second maneuvers determined whether the American pilot could exploit the Eliminator's superior agility. The Ensign Eliminator proved its promise almost immediately. In tight dogfights, pilots executed sharp climbs and rapid rolls, evading attacks that had previously guaranteed destruction in a Wildcat. Using dive and climb energy tactics combined with the Eliminator's responsiveness, pilots could force Zeros into defensive positions, gaining windows to return fire with deadly efficiency. Reports from the first missions confirmed what engineers and trainers had hoped. The new aircraft leveled the playing field. One notable engagement involved a small American flight escorting a reconnaissance plane near the Solomon Islands. 3 Zeros intercepted, initiating a classic vertical maneuver attack. The Eliminator pilots maintained energy advantage, using steep dives to gain speed and sharp rolls to evade sustained fire. Within minutes, 2 Zeros were critically damaged and forced to retreat, while the third disengaged after sustaining minor hits. These encounters, though small in scale, marked a psychological shift. American pilots now believed they could survive against the feared Zero. The turning point, however, was not in a single battle but in the cumulative lessons learned from repeated encounters. Pilots refined formation flying, coordinated fire zones, and emergency evasion protocols. Each engagement informed the next, creating a body of tactical knowledge that extended beyond individual skill. By the time major operations like the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands approached, U.S. fighter groups equipped with Eliminators could challenge Japanese dominance more consistently, striking with precision while minimizing losses. Operational reports emphasized the synergy between machine and pilot. The Eliminator required respect. It could not compensate for hesitation, poor timing, or misjudgment. Yet it provided the capability to turn theory into survival. Commanders observed higher kill ratios and reduced casualties among pilots flying the new fighter. Wingmen gained confidence, formations stayed tighter, and the overall effectiveness of air patrols increased measurably. Leadership noted another critical factor: the aircraft's psychological impact on the enemy. Japanese pilots, accustomed to total air superiority, now faced American fighters that could match their maneuverability. Reports suggested that Zeros began to show signs of caution, adjusting attack patterns and avoiding extended engagement with Eliminator-equipped squadrons. In effect, the U.S. had begun to seize control of the aerial initiative, shifting the dynamic from reactive survival to proactive engagement. Even as victories accumulated, challenges remained. Mechanical failures, limited pilot experience, and the unpredictable nature of Pacific weather continued to impose risk. Each successful sortie reinforced lessons in energy management, situational awareness, and split-second decision-making. The climax was not a single, explosive moment, but the steady accumulation of advantage, skill, innovation, and bravery converging to change the balance of power in the Pacific skies. By late 1942, it was clear that the Ensign Eliminator had transformed U.S. naval aviation. What had begun as a desperate experiment had become a tangible countermeasure to the Zero's dominance. American pilots now flew with cautious confidence. Commanders could plan operations with more flexibility, and engineers could refine designs with practical feedback from the front lines. The Pacific War's air battles would never be the same. By the close of 1942, the Ensign Eliminator had proven itself in the skies over the South Pacific. Early skepticism had given way to cautious respect among pilots and commanders alike. The experimental fighter, once a tentative solution born of desperation, had now established itself as a credible tool against the Japanese Zero. Reports from squadron leaders detailed measurable improvements in engagement outcomes, higher survival rates, increased enemy aircraft damaged, and more controlled retreats when engagements went awry. Pilots spoke of a renewed sense of agency. Whereas encounters with Zeros had once been exercises in fear management, they now involved tactical planning and execution. Letters home from ensigns described the exhilaration of successfully maneuvering against a Zero, the precise timing of rolls and dives, and the adrenaline of outmaneuvering an enemy long considered superior. These personal victories, though small in scale, were foundational in rebuilding morale across carrier air groups. The aircraft itself, while not perfect, demonstrated the value of innovation under pressure. Mechanics and engineers continued to refine the Eliminator's components based on real-world data. Engine responsiveness was tuned, control surfaces adjusted, and minor structural vulnerabilities reinforced. Each iteration reflected a growing understanding of the interaction between pilot and machine, a symbiosis that was just as critical as raw performance. Strategically, the Ensign Eliminator allowed commanders to reconsider operational priorities. Carrier-based patrols could engage Japanese aircraft with less reliance on sheer numbers, and the risk calculus of sorties shifted in favor of U.S. forces. Engagements that would have previously resulted in catastrophic losses could now be approached with tactical flexibility. This shift also had a psychological effect on Japanese pilots. Intelligence-intercepted reports and pilot accounts noted a subtle change in enemy behavior. Zeros were less likely to engage recklessly, more likely to probe and disengage, and increasingly wary of concentrated American formations. Despite these gains, the war remained perilous. Losses still occurred, often due to inexperience, mechanical failure, or the unpredictable chaos of combat. Even the Eliminator could not compensate for poor judgment or fatigue. Yet the aircraft's introduction marked a turning point. The balance in dogfights was no longer overwhelmingly in favor of the Japanese. Pilots who had once felt at the mercy of the Zero's superior maneuverability could now rely on skill, preparation, and technology to survive and fight effectively. The first months of operational deployment also revealed lessons in squadron coordination. Solo flights, once standard practice, were supplemented by new formation techniques designed to maximize the Eliminator's advantages. Wingmen provided overlapping fields of fire. Energy tactics were synchronized across groups, and tactical retreats were executed with disciplined precision. The combination of pilot skill, aircraft capability, and squadron cohesion transformed engagements into contests of strategy rather than mere reflexes. Reports circulated among command that the Ensign Eliminator had not only altered survival odds, but had begun to influence Japanese strategic thinking. Zeros, once unchallenged, faced opposition that could anticipate maneuvers and exploit weaknesses. For the first time, American air units could initiate engagements with a measure of confidence, rather than reacting solely to enemy actions. These developments foreshadowed larger-scale operations in which U.S. naval aviation would no longer be on the defensive, but increasingly capable of shaping the aerial battlefield. The human dimension remained central. Pilots developed a sense of trust, not only in the machine they flew but in each other. Successes were shared, mistakes analyzed, and tactics refined. This combination of technology and human collaboration reinforced the idea that the Pacific War's air battles were not won solely by engineering, but by the integration of innovation, discipline, and courage. As winter approached, the lessons of the first combat deployments of the Ensign Eliminator were clear. It was not a miracle weapon, nor an invincible plane. It was, however, a turning point, a tangible manifestation of American adaptability, ingenuity, and resolve. These early results set the stage for broader adoption, more ambitious operations, and a reassessment of air strategy across the Pacific theater. By early 1943, the effects of the Ensign Eliminator were undeniable. Squadron reports, intelligence summaries, and pilot debriefings converged on a clear conclusion. The United States had gained a significant edge in the ongoing battle for air superiority in the Pacific. The aircraft's introduction did not eliminate the threat of the Zero, but it transformed it from a near-mythical predator into a manageable adversary. Casualty reports reflected this shift. While losses remained inevitable in the unpredictable chaos of aerial combat, pilots flying the Eliminator were far more likely to survive engagements. A comparison of sorties before and after deployment showed a measurable decrease in aircraft lost to Japanese fighters, alongside an increase in enemy kills and damaged aircraft. Pilots' letters, memoirs, and after-action reports all noted the growing confidence that came from flying a machine capable of contesting the Zero in a one-on-one engagement. The tactical implications were equally profound. Commanders could plan missions with more flexibility, no longer forced to rely solely on massed numbers or defensive postures. The Eliminator enabled hit-and-run raids, escort missions with greater confidence, and coordinated group tactics that leveraged the aircraft's superior maneuverability. These operational advantages extended to carrier-based operations, where the ability to project air power without catastrophic losses proved vital for controlling critical supply lines and contested islands. The Japanese, meanwhile, began to recognize the shift. Intercepted reports and prisoner debriefings revealed a subtle, but significant, change in their approach. Zeros became more cautious, avoiding prolonged engagements with U.S. fighters in areas where Eliminators were known to operate. Aggressive maneuvers were tempered by wariness, and pilots increasingly relied on numerical superiority to overcome the tactical advantages of American aircraft. In effect, the psychological dominance the Zeros had once held was beginning to erode. Technological lessons from the Eliminator extended beyond immediate survival. Engineers and designers refined other aircraft based on its performance data, weight distribution, control surface responsiveness, and energy management became central considerations in subsequent fighter designs. The iterative feedback loop between pilots in combat and engineers on the ground accelerated technological evolution in U.S. naval aviation, influencing designs that would later define mid- and late-war air combat capabilities. The human element, however, remained decisive. Even the most advanced fighter could not compensate for fatigue, poor judgment, or inexperience. The Navy invested heavily in training programs that incorporated Eliminator tactics, energy management drills, and simulated engagements with Zero stand-ins. Pilots learned to anticipate enemy movements, to trust both their instincts and their aircraft, and to operate cohesively as part of a squadron. Success in the air became a combination of technology, skill, and coordination, a lesson the Pacific War would reinforce repeatedly. On a broader scale, the Ensign Eliminator symbolized American ingenuity under pressure. It was born from desperation, refined through disciplined experimentation, and validated in the crucible of combat. Its development demonstrated the capacity to innovate quickly, integrate intelligence into design, and produce tangible results on the battlefield. These lessons influenced not only aircraft design but also operational strategy, pilot training, and leadership philosophy throughout the Pacific theater. By mid-1943, the cumulative impact of the Eliminator was evident in major operations. Air engagements increasingly featured coordinated attacks leveraging both tactical ingenuity and aircraft performance. The psychological advantage of fearlessness, once the domain of Japanese pilots, was now shared, to a measured degree, by American forces. Zeros no longer operated with impunity. Every encounter carried risk, every sortie demanded respect, and every pilot was forced to consider the capabilities of both machine and adversary. In the end, the Ensign Eliminator was not merely a plane. It was a turning point, a proof of principle that technology, strategy, and human skill could converge to overcome a seemingly invincible enemy. Its success did not end the Pacific War, nor did it render combat safe. But it marked the moment when the United States began to regain control of the skies, a critical precondition for victory in the island-hopping campaigns that would follow. The story of the Ensign Eliminator naturally leads to reflection, a consideration not only of machines and tactics, but of courage, ingenuity, and the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Its legacy would endure far beyond the first successful sorties, shaping both the pilots who flew it and the broader course of naval aviation. The story of the Ensign Eliminator is, at its core, a story of adaptation. Against an enemy that had once seemed untouchable, the United States found a way to innovate, to think differently, and to turn fear into strategy. In the cockpit, young ensigns learned to trust both their instincts and their aircraft, discovering that courage alone was insufficient, but combined with ingenuity, discipline, and precise machinery, it could reshape the battlefield. The Zero, once the symbol of invincibility, became a measure of progress. Each engagement, each tactical adjustment, each incremental improvement in aircraft design represented a small reclamation of control. Pilots came to understand that survival was not luck. It was preparation, study, and relentless refinement. The Ensign Eliminator was more than a machine. It was a tangible embodiment of this philosophy, a testament to the merging of human skill and technological possibility. Its impact extended beyond individual dogfights. Carrier operations became more confident, patrols more effective, and commanders could plan with a degree of certainty previously impossible. The psychological dominance of the Japanese Zero was diminished, replaced by a new equilibrium where initiative, coordination, and ingenuity mattered as much as raw speed or maneuverability. Above all, the Ensign Eliminator reminds us that war is as much a crucible of the human spirit as it is a contest of machines. It is the courage to confront fear, the creativity to adapt, and the discipline to execute under pressure that define outcomes as decisively as any engine or airframe. In the vast skies of the Pacific, innovation became a weapon, and the pilots who wielded it found that even against a seemingly perfect enemy, survival and victory was possible. As the sun sets over the distant coral atolls, silhouetting the quiet decks of carriers and the sleek outlines of fighters at rest, one truth endures. The Ensign Eliminator was more than a response to the Zero. It was proof that necessity, ingenuity, and human courage could converge to shape history, one aerial maneuver at a time.